a discussion about this year's defense news list of the top 100 defense contractors. Today, August 14th, 2023. Good morning, Early Birds. I'm Jonathan Lehrfeld, and this is the Early Bird Brief, produced by Defense News and Military Times. Today, Military Times reporter and podcast producer Simone Perez talked with Defense News air warfare reporter Stephen Losey. They discussed findings from this year's Defense News annual ranking of the top 100 global defense companies shaping militaries around the world.
So, Stephen, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Glad to be here.
So, you, and I mean, this is not just you, but this is a Defense News-wide effort to chart out the top 100 defense contractors in the year 2023. Could you break down the big names in defense this year, the top 5 perhaps, and what's keeping them up there? We know that list doesn't really change much, but there have been some issues and successes between different companies that have really, reshuffled just a little bit the top 5.
For the most part, the top 10 or so on the top 100 list, you tend to see the same names pop up year after year, just with a little bit of reshuffling. Like right now, this year, for example, Lockheed Martin kept its perch at the top of the top 100, number one. Lockheed Martin, the manufacturer of the F-35 and numerous other major programs. So that's not too much of a surprise. RTX, formerly known as Raytheon up until recently, stayed at number 2. Northrop Grumman rose this year they were 4th last year. They hit number 3 this year. Northrop Grumman had a pretty good year in 2022. Their biggest high-profile program was the B-21 Raider, the new stealth bomber that the Air Force rolled out last December. So far, it seems like it's going pretty well. The Air Force seems pretty happy with it. Northrop Grumman's also working on the Sentinel intercontinental ballistic missile, which is previously known as the ground-based strategic deterrent, and that's also a major program for them. You also saw Boeing slip this year. Last year, they were 3rd on the list. Boeing dropped down 2 slots to 5th. Boeing had a bit of a rough year. The KC-46 Pegasus tanker has had some issues on several features, including the vision system for a while. There's been a lot of charges on the KC-46 program. Boeing's had some issues with the Air Force One recapitalization, the new presidential plane. The T-7 Red Hawk trainer has had some delays of its own. So I think some of those issues are what you're seeing reflected in Boeing's slight dip from 3rd to 5th in the past year.
Yeah, definitely. And you were talking about how DoD is bringing in more small companies to expand the defense industrial base. I mean, we're really at a point where that's a major priority with a not looming, but, conflict with China in the back of many policymakers' minds, with our shortage on munitions for Ukraine, not making that 85,000 155 millimeter goal for rounds. And then also the Army and other services' big modernization goals. So what is this effort that DoD is really starting to bring in smaller companies into the defense industrial base?
That's right. I think one of the things that's really interesting about the DoD's modernization efforts to prepare for something like a conflict against China is that some of these programs are really reliant on, in some ways, kind of cutting-edge technology. That means like hypersonic weapons, for example, that can travel at 5 times faster than the speed of sound. A lot of use of technology such as artificial intelligence, autonomous software, things like that. The thing that comes to mind immediately for me is the Air Force and its Collaborative Combat Aircraft program, kind of colloquially known as Loyal Wingman in the case of Australia. But basically, the idea is the Air Force wants to have a fleet of kind of cheaper, sometimes expendable drones that have autonomous software, artificial intelligence, they can basically fly themselves with kind of minimal or no instruction and fly alongside an F-35 or the future next generation air dominance platform, which is the Air Force's desired 6th generation fighter, fly ahead, conduct scout missions, recon missions, serve as decoys, conduct electronic warfare attacks, or even fire their own missiles at enemy targets. The way the Air Force is thinking, if a war with China were to break out, the Air Force can't afford to send wave after wave of F-35s. There's not enough pilots. Those are very expensive planes. They can't afford to take those kind of losses. So they're trying to buttress their own strike capability with these autonomous drones. So the Air Force is putting a major push towards this effort. But, that's going to mean a lot of, as I said, autonomous software, artificial intelligence software. Some of these big companies are already working on these sorts of things, but there's a lot of littler technology-focused firms that are also working on these kinds of programs. And I find it kind of interesting that it seems like when you look at this year's Defense News Top 100 list, you're starting to see some of these smaller firms kind of get a little bit more of a toehold in the top 100 list. See, like I said, the top 10 stays roughly the same, but the shuffling at the bottom, I think, is kind of interesting and telling.
Let's talk about that a little bit, right? You have mentioned that, the top 50, and which is ironic. It's like lame, that's not where a lot of the action is in terms of jostling for position. But you say the bottom 50 is where, we should be looking for and like seeing where this competition and where these, efforts and forays into modernization should really propel some companies. And so who are these companies? What are they specializing in? What do they see their place in this list, but also just more importantly, across the defense industrial base?
Yeah, the company that comes to mind most quickly for me is Kratos Defense and Security Solutions. This is a company that for the last couple of years has been working pretty closely with the Air Force on the issue of uncrewed aircraft technology, drones, and autonomy. They make the XQ-58 Valkyrie that the Air Force for the last couple of years has been using to test a variety of programs, including some of the Skyborg technology that the Air Force was working on, which was like an autonomous effort that they were working on. They're a little hesitant to talk about the Collaborative Combat Aircraft program itself, but there's definitely a lot of work that the Air Force is still engaging in with the Valkyrie and testing it. When I spoke to Kratos, they pointed to the Air Force's announcements last fall about Eglin Air Force Base in Florida taking possession of a pair of Valkyrie drones and starting to run tests on these drones, flying them alongside F-16 fighters, for example, taking a look at how its autonomous software is used. And these are the kind of things that the Air Force is trying to just sort of figure out. How does this kind of autonomous man-on-man teaming is the term they use. How does this kind of technology work, and how might it work in actual combat? And these sorts of test flights are kind of helping the Air Force potentially map out a game plan for how these aircraft would be used in an actual conflict.
What happened with Kratos on that list, right? Where did they fall? Are they one of those sneaky companies hopping onto the list for the first time in a while?
So Kratos briefly popped on the list once before, but hasn't really made a whole lot of waves in the Defense News Top 100 list until this year. This year, Kratos had a big improvement in its revenue, saw 10% growth, and landed on the Defense News Top 100 list at number 88. Which is a pretty significant jump for a company that's hasn't really made a whole lot of waves in the top 100 until now. And I think the fact that you're seeing more interest in the Air Force, from the Air Force, on things like autonomous drones and the accompanying technology is why might be why we're seeing Kratos have a stronger showing on the top 100 list. And it'll be interesting to see if Kratos is able to kind of continue this track record in years to come.
And any other big names that we should be on the lookout for in terms of where they're falling on this list?
I thought Spirit Aerosystems, an airframe manufacturer from Wichita, Kansas, also had a pretty interesting showing on the top 100 list. Like Kratos, Spirit had popped on about once before, but wasn't a regular fixture on the Defense News Top 100 list. Spirit landed at a pretty good spot as well, at 86 on the list. They saw an 11% growth in their defense revenue. Spirit's a company that's made structural components for a long time for aircraft such as the E-7 Wedgetail, V-280 Valor, and parts of the B-21 Raider for Boeing, Bell, and Northrop Grumman. They're also working on building the struts and nacelles for the major re-engineering program for the B-52 bomber. And Spirit executives are sounding pretty confident that their outlook is good in the future. They're hoping to reach a goal of $1 billion in defense and space revenues by 2025. And they, in a recent earnings call earlier this year, they outlined a couple of different growth areas that they think are prime opportunities for growth for them, including hypersonics, unmanned aerial systems, next generation programs, including next generation aircraft and space.
The Ukraine war not going away, competition, strategic competition with China, or just adversarial relationship with China not going away. Based on how you're reading the cards right now, what are some things to look out for when we're sitting here a year from now and the 2024 Defense News Top 100 list comes out?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see the ways in which the Ukraine war will shape the 2024 list. Because recall, the 2023 list takes into account information from 2022 when the Ukraine war started. This list doesn't show the full effect of the Ukraine war because the United States' effort to arm Ukraine and support them really took a couple of months to really start getting going. The 2024 list, Top 100 list, is going to be the first in which we have a full year of Ukraine war effects. So it'll be interesting to see what, if any, impact that has on the Top 100 list. One company I'm going to be kind of keeping an eye on that I find kind of interesting is AeroVironment. This is the company that makes the Switchblade loitering munition. It's become a rather significant arrow in Ukraine's quiver in their fight against Russia. These loitering munitions are basically armed drones, explosive drones that can fly around, they can hover, they can fly around, scout out an area, and then when the service member controlling them sees a target that they want to strike, send it in and destroy that target. So Ukraine's made some very creative use of the Switchblade loitering munition over the last year. AeroVironment was a big player in this. Not big enough yet to make the top 100 list. Might not be big enough to make the top 100 list next year, but they did see an 8% growth in defense revenue in 2022. So it'll be interesting to see whether that continues in the 2024 list and what other companies that have a role to play in the Ukraine war might start creeping up the list next year. So that'll be interesting to watch.
That's it for us this morning. To get more of the top stories and breaking news, go to defensenews.com/EBB to subscribe to the Early Bird Brief newsletter. Please give us a like, rating, and a comment wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on social media @Defense_News and @Military Times. The Early Bird Brief is hosted by me, Jonathan Lehrfeld, and produced by Simone Z. Perez. If you liked our conversation today, be sure to check out the top 100 list at defensenews.com. Our editor-in-chief is Mike Gruss. Have a great day.